Hey, InterVarsity alumni. This is After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. This is both an exciting and potentially tricky transition that you're making, and you might feel a little unsure about the coming weeks and months. We're here to provide you with expert advice, practical skills, and plenty of encouragement as you learn how to keep saying yes to Jesus in your new context. This is After 4, and this podcast is for you, alumni. What's up, alumni? Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele. And this week, we are wrapping up our series on vocational transition. You're going to get to listen in on a couple of previously unheard moments from some recent guests as they give a couple final pieces of advice. Up first, we return to our conversation with Dr. Felicia Song, and she's going to share a really great discipline to consider incorporating as part of any transitional experience that you have in the future, whether that's professional or otherwise. It's a practice to help you discern whether or not the directions you're considering are helping you live into your calling. Here's Dr. Song, and this one's for you, alumni.
And for those that might be writing-oriented people, it might be helpful to journal regularly or to take times of personal examination or assessment that says, okay, let's review what we thought the calling was and where we are right now.
Yes.
And, I've told I teach undergraduates and I've told my undergraduates who are graduating, they're seniors and they're graduating college. And I've said to them multiple times, it is good to articulate for yourself what you think God is leading you to be or who. It doesn't always have to be a career. It's just like, what kind of person am I? Right. And what role can I play as I live out my days? Right. That God is calling me to. And maybe there's just, you try to hone in on like 3 things, say, and you just keep that little piece of paper in your pocket and you come back to it when you're about to take your first job, when you're about to start a grad program, when you're going to get married, when you might start having children. And you actually look at that piece of paper and you look at it, and it's not to say that you're strapped to those 3 points that you came up with when you're 21.
Sure.
Right? Because we grow and then we evolve and so forth. But to be honest with ourselves and prayerfully say, okay, like, am I still aligned to this, what I thought was my calling? Has that calling shifted, right? Or is it taking a different form that I didn't expect? But just having that kind of baseline to work with, like, oh, this was my 21-year-old self. Now this is my 25-year-old self. Now here's my 31-year-old self, right? To be having that conversation, not just with yourself, but with God, is super helpful, I think, in whatever we're doing, right? It's not just the career, but it's like all these major life stage transition times that involve all of us, right? Like if you're getting married, if you're having kids, like that's going to impact your career. If you're changing a job, that's going to impact your being a parent, whatever it is, right? It's all like bound together with the calling that God has for us, right? That it isn't God just calling us to, getting this done in the career or being this kind of parent. It's totally interwoven. And I think that's the beauty of the trust in God's goodness that followers of Jesus have, right? That things might not be working in the way that we thought, or we don't see how 2 parts of our lives can actually fit together, but we prayerfully take each step forward, right? And trust that God is going to lead us in towards what is good, and not give us the rock or the snake, right?
Yes.
But that there he God's love is full for all of us.
Such great advice and such a simple practice to return to from time to time as well. I mean, what are the things that you're sensing God is calling you to? Write them down. And whenever you're facing a big decision or transition of some sort, return to that list. Invite the Lord to re examine it and get a refreshed sense of whether or not you're on track with that calling, or if there might even be some updating on what you understand your calling to be. Thanks so much, Dr. Song. If you didn't catch her whole episode, you can find a link to it in the show notes. It's episode 113, Navigating a Career in Academia. And whether or not you're pursuing that specific career path, Dr. Song has some fantastic advice for navigating your career in healthy ways. All right, up next, we return to my conversation with Kyle Campbell, an alumnus with a job dealing with literal millions of dollars on a daily basis. At one point, I mentioned that our relationship with money is something that can have a significant negative impact on our hearts, even in a quote-unquote normal job, and that I imagine it had to be even more significant in a job where money is the central focus. And so I wondered how Kyle stays grounded in a position like his. What follows are his thoughts on that idea.
And you can't get promoted without caring intimately about the numbers, because the people who promote you care intimately about the numbers, and they don't get promoted unless they care intimately about the numbers. So even if you start out, even like me, I went to college, or I went to my first role hearing from the Lord, believing in my body and in my soul, knowing my goal is to give away 60% of my income and live off of 40. Like, that's what God asked me to do.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing. I'm not here to make money. I'm here to have a platform to be generous. Like, all that sounds great. And I was doing a lot. I was giving, honestly, too much. I was going into debt. I was paying for people's, car payments on my credit card because I just wanted to be generous. That wasn't wise. But my heart was in the right place. But slowly over time, even someone maybe starting with such audacious goals, it can just, you're forced to think about it on a daily basis in a way that maybe in other ways you're not. If you're a doctor, you make a lot of money, but you spend your time with people. But in finance, you make a lot of money and you spend your time with money. It's just different.
Yeah. What are some healthy ways that you're discovering, and I'm sure still in process on, as far as trying to tip the scales or at least balance the scales for those kinds of things, so that people, you don't get promoted, you're not listened to unless you know the numbers. So you need to know the numbers. Like, be excellent at your job for sure. But how do you bring that into balance with this human element that we've talked a little bit about already? But what do you do to maintain to not lose your mind over money every day at work?
Yeah. I agree with you. One, loud and clear, right? All of you new grads, if you want some career advice, here it is. Either be excellent or be engaging. Great if you can be both, but be really good or be really good at making people feel good. Either one, you'll be very successful. I've worked with people who were bums at their job, but they were great in the break room and they kept getting promoted, right? And then, I've worked with people who were completely brilliant and they couldn't have a conversation. So there's that. But how do you sort of stay grounded? I would be interested to hear how other alumni have done that. For me, I have to be active and intentionally trying to tie what my goals are for the company back to a life changed, which is sometimes hard. But if you think about it, when you make someone a $5,000 loan, there's a good chance that $5,000 is life changing for them, or else they wouldn't need a $5,000 loan. When you make someone a $5 million loan, there's a good chance that money doesn't mean that much to them because they can afford a $5 million loan. And then when you get to the first time you hand somebody or you wire somebody $50 million and it does not change the way that they live their life, it's like, oh, okay. wow, I saved a guy $2 million on his taxes and he didn't even say thank you. So it was just like, okay, that's interesting. And so like, I say that to give context to people who are like, what do you mean? Like money changes hands. I'm just saying like, typically the higher in your career you go, the bigger the numbers get, and the bigger the numbers get, actually the less impact it typically has on real people and real problems and their real world. And so I have to be really intentional to try to trace the thread of like, okay, I I did this deal. This seller got $74 million in cash. It just showed up in his bank account that day. How do I view this as a gospel moment, right? How do I view this, right? And so, one, that's why I kept talking about understanding context and empathy, because it is incredibly difficult to have any sort of value for helping people at a certain level if you don't have any empathy for them. But I have to keep tying it back down to who are the people who I'm impacting. Yes, the seller who made a couple dozen million, his staff who we've guaranteed, employment for 3 years, so and so who I'm going to find a way. I know that I did interviews with the whole staff. I know there's 4 people that are unhappy. I can't change the situation right now, but in 3 months I can, right? Like I know where I can put them. Like I keep trying to find places where, yes, the big thing I have to know, but all the levels underneath it, like how can I remind myself that this large amount of money is affecting real people, and then I get to be a part of stewarding this. Not I have to, not I just happen to be, but I get to be. Anyone else can be in my seat. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. But at some point, if you let it, the money will be a proxy for money. And the reality is that money is actually a proxy for trust. Anything that you can do with money, you could do better with trust. If you had the trust of a millionaire, you would never need a loan, right? And it's in many ways it's why it's such a great indicator for where our hearts are, because it's where our trust is. And so I have to actively decide on a daily basis that the goals that I'm trying to reach are about cultivating trust with people in authority, about affecting people down the line. People, just keep bringing it back to people.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, everything just becomes another column, another checkbox, another way that I get to say I did something big, or, yep, I made my bonus, or whatever it is. And it quickly becomes worthless, even though we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars.
Drawing things back to trust and to people. That's how you help maintain balance for living in this financially focused context that you're in while you're in the daily grind of work. What about outside of that? Like, so then when you go home, what does it look like to continue developing balance? Like, as far as there's balance within work, how about work life? How do you help maintain a healthy life balance alongside of your work, so that you're not that guy or that person that's sleeping under their desk at 3 a.m, being woken up by the cleaning crew, and then you go back to work again?
Yeah. I would say one, community, right? So this is where InterVarsity shines through and cuts through the noise. I don't know what everyone else's chapter was like, but my staff pounded community. And so, one, I began to develop some community within my roles at work. As I built relationships, some people became community at work, but I had community, good, strong biblical community outside of work, who had just enough of a view into my life and enough trust where they could say, hey, we're red card, like, chill out. What is going on here?
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, for me, it was my wife who saved my life. I mean, God sent her to me. She rescued me.
Wow.
And I proposed to her and she said yes in front of everyone else. And then when we had a moment alone, she said, I will marry you, but I will not marry the version of you that works like this. So, hey, the date's in 13 months. in 13 months and 1 day, it better be fixed. Like, you're not doing this. And she loved me enough to, to call me back to like, hey, why are you working so hard? The funny thing, the not so funny thing, but funny now, infuriating back when I was younger, I've been promoted a ton, right? We talk about it. I didn't start getting promoted quickly until I stopped working so much.
Wow.
I was like stuck in the mud doing everything. I had broken every single record and every single role I had. Like, I was that guy not getting promoted, almost to the point where I was like angry. Well, not angry, not almost. I was angry with the Lord. I'm like, what are you doing? You're the one that told me to come here. You're the one that did all this. I'm doing everything. I'm killing myself. It seems like almost like miraculously, I'm not being promoted. When my life became more balanced and I was willing to lose my job to save my relationship with Christ and myself, the floodgates started opening. And so, I mean, the first 2 or 3 years it was like, and then the next 3 or 4 years, I got promoted 6 or 7 times.
Wow.
In 3 years. And then I got my first role as a CFO at 26. So it's just like, okay, what the heck is going on? I'm like, why are you hiring me? What is happening? And then I had to have the conversation like, hey, I'm not on a project basis. I'll do what it needs to be. On a normal week, you got till 5:15. Otherwise, like, I'm going, like, I'll see you tomorrow. Nothing is that important. But I thought I was going to lose my job. People threatened me to lose my jobs when I tried to start to set boundaries. So I don't want to make it seem like it's an easy thing. I would say be willing to lose your job for the sake of your life and your relationship with Christ, and trust God. It's cliche, but yeah, that's what it took. So the work-life balance, it took a while to get. But I had community who cared enough to challenge me and call me to task and beat me up a little bit in love and remind me that what would the point be?
Life change and community. How is the work you're doing around money connected to real world, real life impact? Whether that's through the job itself or through the portion of that money that makes its way into your bank account. What's the kingdom impact? And who are the people in your life who can help call you back into healthy rhythms? We need those people. Find those people. Kyle, thanks again for joining me. If you didn't get to hear his whole episode about navigating a career in finance, you can find a link to that in the show notes. I'll also share links to his episode on our other alumni podcast, InterVarsity World Changers. If you haven't heard Kyle's story about risky corporate evangelism, I highly recommend giving it a listen. Then be sure to come back next week for part 1 of a summer sub-series called One Easy Way to Stay Connected with Your Chapter. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today, alumni. If there was anything that you learned, really enjoyed, or that encouraged you from today's episode, would you send us a DM or tag us in a story? We'd love to hear about it. You can find us at After4Pod on Instagram and Facebook. And if you haven't already, take just a second to unlock your phone and subscribe to the podcast. If your platform lets you, leave us a rating and a review. And if you like what we're doing here, share us with your InterVarsity or other post-graduation friends. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you in the after, alumni.